I paid for my sister's education while working several jobs only to have her call me a loser and a weakling at a family dinner. My name is Olivia Carter, and I'm 28 years old. I've always been the responsible one in my family, the sibling who quietly shoulders the weight while others chase their dreams. Growing up, I worked hard in school, got my mechanic certification, and took pride in building a stable life for myself. I never imagined that family first would one day become a chain around my own future. Before the story truly began, my life had already been about balancing responsibilities. I had taken on extra shifts, saved every penny I could, and even postponed some of my own dreams, all to make sure my family didn't struggle. I was used to being the one everyone relied on, and I didn't mind helping. But there's a difference between helping and being exploited, a line I hadn't realized Emily, my younger sister, would eventually push me over. It all started when Emily, then 19, got accepted into her dream college. I should have been ecstatic for her, but the excitement was tempered with anxiety. My parents had made it clear from the start that they couldn't cover her tuition. Emily is brilliant, but college is so expensive these days, my mother would mutter during family dinners, glancing at me as if I didn't already know the implications. My father offered similar hints, "We'll support you as much as we can, Liv, but some things you might have to help with." I didn't have much myself. At the time, I was working 2 jobs as a mechanic and a barista, scraping together money for a small apartment and saving what I could for a future that often felt just out of reach. But Emily was my sister, and I told myself, what's a little more sacrifice if it helps her dream come true? At first, my support was minor, a few textbooks here, some groceries there, maybe helping cover a night out so she could unwind. But it didn't stop there. The requests escalated quickly: rent, utilities, clothes, nights out, even weekend trips. Every time she asked, there was a justification. "I'll pay you back when I graduate," she would say with a casual shrug, or, "Mom and Dad just can't help right now." What made it worse was the silent approval from my parents. They acted as if I was obligated to support her. "Family takes care of family," my mother said, eyes soft but her words sharp. I was already working 2 jobs, sacrificing weekends, and postponing my own dreams, and still, it wasn't enough. Emily, meanwhile, seemed to believe the world owed her everything. Her social media was full of photos showing lavish dinners, weekend getaways, and brand new outfits. All of it paid for by me. At first, I tried to rationalize her behavior. Maybe she had a part-time job. Maybe she was just trying to fit in. But the truth was revealed when I asked casually about her spending habits, and she simply shrugged. "Everyone at school dresses like this," she said lightly. "I don't want to look like I don't belong." It wasn't just about money. It was everything: the attitude, the entitlement, the assumption that I existed solely to fund her lifestyle. She never once asked how I was doing or whether I needed help. My parents weren't much better. When I tried to speak up about my struggles, they dismissed my concerns, telling me I should be proud to help my sister. But it wasn't just helping, it was sacrifice. My weekends were gone, my savings depleted, and the house I had dreamed of seemed further away than ever. Meanwhile, Emily didn't even bother with a thank you note. Instead, she called to complain about professors, roommates, and assignments, never acknowledging the sacrifices I had made. Resentment began to grow, quietly at first, like embers in the dark. Each time I made another payment, skipped another meal, or worked a late shift to keep her afloat, I felt a small piece of my patience crumble. I told myself it was temporary, that once she graduated, everything would make sense. But deep down, I knew I was starting to hate the imbalance, the way my life was on hold while hers advanced effortlessly. The first real crack came when Emily casually mentioned wanting to study abroad. She didn't ask whether I could afford it, she assumed I would make it happen. "I think it would be such a great experience," she said over the phone, her tone light and carefree. "The program costs a bit more, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, right?" I gripped the phone, stunned. I could barely keep up with her normal expenses, and now she wanted me to pay for a semester abroad? When I brought it up with my parents, hoping for some sense of reality, they doubled down. "This is an incredible opportunity," my mother said brightly. "You'll figure it out. You always do." No acknowledgement of my struggles. No concern for my well-being. Just the expectation that I would continue to sacrifice everything because, apparently, that was my role in the family. Emily's entitlement grew bolder by the day. She complained about minor inconveniences, borrowed shoes, cafeteria coffee, trivial assignments, and started making subtle digs at me. "She doesn't appreciate you," a coworker said one night while I vented during a break. "You bend over backward, and she acts like you owe her." I started to question myself. Was I really being unreasonable? Or had I simply forgotten that my life mattered too? Then came the dinner that changed everything. Emily was back in town for a break, and my parents invited me over to catch up. I didn't want to go, but I figured I could tolerate a few hours. When I arrived, the atmosphere was tense. My parents fussed over Emily endlessly, asking about classes, friends, and social life, while I sat quietly, waiting for someone to ask how I was. Of course, no one did. Halfway through dinner, Emily brought up studying abroad again. She looked at me with that infuriating grin and said, "I hope you're ready for a little extra work, big sister. These programs don't come cheap." I froze. My fork fell onto my plate with a clatter. "Maybe you should get a part-time job," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Emily laughed, carefree and mocking. "A part-time job? I'm too busy with school." That was the last straw. I set down my fork and stared at her. "You're joking, right? You think I'm just going to keep funding your lifestyle forever while you sit around doing nothing?" The room went silent. My parents looked at me as if I had lost my mind. Emily's jaw dropped, but she quickly recovered. "What's your problem?" she snapped. "You've always been so bitter. Just because your life isn't going anywhere doesn't mean you can take it out on me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. After everything I'd done, this was how she saw me: bitter, ungrateful, a failure. "You think I'm bitter because my life isn't going anywhere, Emily?" I said, leaning forward. "My life isn't going anywhere because I've been too busy funding yours." After that dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had shifted. Something inside me had snapped, and I knew I couldn't keep living like this, working 2 jobs, sacrificing my dreams, while Emily lounged in a life I was funding. I tried to convince myself that I had been patient, that I had been generous, but patience has limits, and generosity can be drained dry. Emily's entitlement only grew bolder in the weeks that followed. She called me constantly, complaining about minor inconveniences that never affected anyone else but her. One afternoon, she called in a panic because her roommate had borrowed her shoes without asking. Another time, she texted nonstop about how the campus cafeteria didn't serve lattes properly. I bit my tongue, telling myself it was temporary, that she was just stressed adjusting to college life. But the more she complained, the more I realized that this wasn't stress, it was privilege wrapped in entitlement, and I was the one paying the price. She began making subtle jabs at me as well. On the phone one night, she laughed while mentioning how I was married to my job. My coworker, noticing my frustration, muttered quietly, "She doesn't appreciate you, Olivia. You bend over backward, and she acts like you owe her." Those words lingered in my mind like a warning I had been ignoring for years. I started paying closer attention to her social media. There she was again, flaunting her new wardrobe, designer bags, fancy dinners, and weekend trips, all things I could barely dream of affording. And I was footing the bill. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had picked up a part-time job to cover some of her expenses. Maybe she was just keeping up appearances. But when I asked casually, she shrugged. "Everyone at school dresses like this," she said lightly, dismissing my concern. "I don't want to look like I don't fit in." Her words, so casual and unapologetic, cut deeper than I expected. I realized then that gratitude was foreign to her. Appreciation didn't exist in Emily's vocabulary. She expected, and she assumed, and she never paused to think about the cost her lifestyle imposed on me. The tipping point came when she called one evening, all bright and carefree, talking about a study abroad program she had her eye on. I could feel my chest tighten as I listened. It would be such an amazing experience, she said, almost giggling. It costs a bit more than normal, but you know it's totally worth it, right? I gripped the phone tightly, struggling to keep my voice calm. Emily, I can barely keep up with your current expenses, I said. A semester abroad? That's impossible right now. Oh, come on, she said lightly. You always figure it out. You always do. My parents, predictably, took her side. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Olivia, my mother said with that familiar tone of mild rebuke. You'll find a way. You always do. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Every word they said was a reminder of how my life had been consumed to support hers. There was no acknowledgement of the late nights, no concern for my well-being, just the expectation that I would continue to sacrifice because, apparently, that was my role in the family. I started keeping closer tabs on her spending. One weekend, she casually mentioned buying a new designer handbag and attending a lavish dinner with friends, and I realized I hadn't even eaten a proper meal all day because I had worked overtime to cover her rent. I tried to talk to her, hoping for some understanding, some hint of gratitude. But all I got was a dismissive shrug. It's just how college works, she said. You don't understand. The truth was, I understood perfectly. I understood the sacrifices, the money I'd given her, the sleepless nights, the dreams I had to push aside. I understood, but she didn't care. And my parents? They encouraged it. Every time I voiced a concern, they framed it as selfishness on my part. She's building a future, Olivia, my mother would say. You should be proud to help her. I realized I had been quiet for too long. Every night I worked late, every weekend I skipped to cover her bills, every penny I saved for myself, it was all being taken for granted. And the more I gave, the more entitlement grew in her. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I returned home to find yet another message from her. This time, it was about clothes she wanted for an event, followed by a reminder that she'd need extra money for transportation. My hand shook as I stared at my phone. Enough was enough. I decided then that I couldn't keep enabling her behavior. I needed to stand up for myself before I completely lost control of my life. I told myself I wasn't cruel, I was finally setting boundaries. For years, I had been her safety net, her ATM, her excuse not to grow up. And now, if she wanted to learn responsibility, she needed to face consequences. The next family dinner loomed over me like a storm cloud. Emily was back in town, and my parents were already expecting me to resume my role as her provider, her buffer, her enabler. I didn't want to go, but I knew I had to confront this head-on. When I arrived, the room buzzed with the usual tension. My parents fawned over Emily, asking about her classes, social life, and plans for the semester. I sat quietly, waiting for someone to acknowledge the exhaustion etched on my face, the stress I carried every day. No one did. Emily, oblivious, launched into her study abroad pitch mid-meal. I hope you're ready for a little extra work, big sister. These programs don't come cheap, she said, grinning smugly at me. I froze. My fork hit the plate with a clatter. Maybe you should get a part-time job, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Her laugh was infuriating. A part-time job? I'm too busy with school. That was it. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep this up any longer. My voice shook, but I tried to keep it steady. You're joking, right? You think I'm going to keep funding your lifestyle forever while you sit around doing nothing? The room went silent. My parents stared at me as if I had lost my mind. Emily's mouth dropped open, but she quickly recovered. What's your problem? She snapped. You've always been so bitter. Just because your life isn't going anywhere doesn't mean you can take it out on me. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. After everything I had done, after every sacrifice, this was how she saw me, bitter. Ungrateful. A failure. I leaned forward, voice firm. You think I'm bitter because my life isn't going anywhere, Emily? My life isn't going anywhere because I've been too busy funding yours. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, control. For the first time I was putting my foot down, reclaiming my life, and refusing to let anyone, least of all my sister, treat me like I was invisible. After that dinner, I knew I couldn't continue like this. Every ounce of energy I had was being siphoned off to maintain Emily's lifestyle, and it was draining me, breaking me in ways I had tried to ignore for years. For the first time I realized something crucial: love doesn't mean endless sacrifice, and family doesn't give you the right to exploit someone who's already giving everything. The next morning, I made a decision. No more rent payments. No more covering utilities. No more spontaneous spending on trips, clothes, or dinners. For years, I had been her safety net, the person who rescued her when she made poor choices. But it was time for her to learn responsibility. It started quietly. I texted Emily that I couldn't cover her next rent payment. I braced myself for the inevitable meltdown. Within minutes, my phone started blowing up. First came her messages, dripping with faux concern and guilt. Thanks for running dinner last night, she wrote. Hope you feel good about leaving your own sister out to dry. I ignored her. I had anticipated the guilt trips. What I hadn't expected was the barrage that followed. You're really going to leave me like this? She texted later. After everything I've been through? I didn't respond. If she wanted to play the victim, she could do it without me. Next, my parents called. My mother's voice was tight with disappointment. Olivia, I don't know what's gotten into you, she said. Emily needs your help. She's your sister. She's been relying on you for years. I took a deep breath. Mom, it's time she learns to take care of herself, I said firmly. I've been doing it for years. I can't anymore. My father followed soon after, sounding incredulous. You're being selfish. You're punishing her for no reason. I laughed bitterly. Punishing her? Dad, she's been living off my paycheck for years while acting like she's entitled to everything. She needs to face reality. She needs to get a job, budget her money, and learn responsibility, just like the rest of us. By the end of that day, I realized just how deep the drama had seeped into my family. Emily's landlord even called me, insisting the rent hadn't been paid. When I explained that I was no longer responsible for her finances, he reluctantly agreed to speak directly with her. It felt liberating to finally have that boundary in place, but I knew it wouldn't stop the storm from my family. Sure enough, Emily didn't take it well. A few days later, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked disheveled, panicked, and unlike the confident, entitled person I was used to seeing. You can't just cut me off, she cried, her voice shaking. Yes, I can, I replied calmly, leaning against the doorframe. Emily shifted nervously, like a child caught in a lie. You don't understand, she said, raising her voice with desperation. If you don't help me, I'm going to lose my apartment. I can't move back home, Mom and Dad don't have room for me. I shook my head. Not my problem anymore, Emily. Her jaw dropped. Not your problem? You're my sister. You've been supporting me for years. I've been more than a sister, I said, stepping forward. I've been your bank, your safety net, your excuse to avoid growing up. I worked 2 jobs so you could live your dream, and the one time I ask for respect, you call me a failure. No, Emily. It's not my problem anymore. She blinked, stunned. I didn't mean it like that, she stammered. I was upset, I just wasn't thinking. You never think, I cut her off sharply. You never think about anyone but yourself. You used me, you used Mom and Dad, and now you're panicking because finally, you have to face consequences. Then she started to cry, dramatic, loud sobs that might have worked on someone else. But not me. Not after years of this. You're not going to guilt me into changing my mind, I said firmly. You need to figure this out on your own. Get a job. Budget your money. Do whatever it takes, but leave me out of it. Her face contorted with anger. You're being cruel, she shouted, wiping her tears. Family is supposed to help each other. No, I said, voice calm but resolute. Family supports each other. They don't take advantage of each other and call it love. Until you figure that out, don't bother coming back here. I closed the door, cutting off any excuse she might have tried to make. For the first time, I felt in control of my life again. But the fallout was inevitable. Emily immediately began her campaign to turn everyone against me. She plastered social media with vague posts about being let down by the people closest to you and even set up a GoFundMe for her rent, claiming she'd been blindsided by unexpected expenses. Donations trickled in slowly, proving that people weren't as eager to fund her lifestyle as she assumed. Word of the drama spread through the family quickly. My aunt called, initially critical, but after I explained the situation, she softened. She really expected you to keep paying her rent, she asked, disbelief in her voice. Welcome to your world, Olivia. The most shocking part was how far my parents had let things go. They had enabled Emily's entitlement for years, then blamed me for setting boundaries. Suddenly, I was the villain, accused of tearing the family apart. But I knew the truth. I had been protecting her from reality for far too long, and it was time she faced consequences. Emily's downward spiral continued. She moved back in with my parents after being evicted, expecting the same indulgence I had provided. Friends who once joined her for fancy dinners now avoided her calls when she demanded attention or money. She had nothing to offer them anymore, and her social standing began to collapse. The real tipping point came when my parents called in a panic. Emily had maxed out a credit card in their name for a shopping spree. They begged me to help, claiming they couldn't make the payments. I couldn't help but laugh. This is your mess to clean up, I told them firmly. You chose to support her. You ignored her behavior. Now you deal with the consequences. For the first time, they didn't argue. I think they realized I wasn't going to rescue her anymore. Not financially, not emotionally, not in any way. I had drawn my line, and I wasn't stepping back. That was the moment I truly felt free. I focused on building my own future without being weighed down by someone else's entitlement. It was hard, painful even, but necessary. Olivia Carter, the sister who had sacrificed everything, was finally reclaiming her life. After cutting Emily off, the tension in my life reached an entirely new level. At first, it was chaos. Her constant messages, the phone calls from my parents, the passive-aggressive comments online, it all felt overwhelming. But with every call ignored, every boundary enforced, I felt a growing sense of clarity. For the first time in years, I was making decisions for myself instead of constantly sacrificing for someone else. Emily didn't take it well. She plastered her social media with posts painting herself as the victim, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love her. Her GoFundMe campaign barely took off. Friends quickly realized that this wasn't a temporary struggle, it was entitlement on full display. Meanwhile, I refused to engage, knowing that the moment I reacted, I would give her power over me again. Family calls became routine. My mother, with that sharp disappointment in her voice, lectured me repeatedly. Olivia, how could you do this to your sister? She's struggling, and you left her? I held my ground. Mom, she's been living off my paycheck for years, I said. She hasn't struggled in the way you think. She's been insulated, pampered, and now she needs to learn responsibility. I've given everything I could, more than anyone should have to. This is the first time she's facing consequences, and it's necessary. My father chimed in later that week, equally frustrated. You're being heartless, he said. We've done so much for you and for her. I laughed quietly, incredulous. Heartless? I funded her lifestyle for years while you watched. I worked 2 jobs so she could live comfortably, and you cheered her on. And now, when I refuse, I'm heartless? Eventually, the calls stopped, or at least became less frequent. My parents slowly realized I wasn't going to resume my role as Emily's bank, and they had to face the reality that I wasn't going to be manipulated into sacrificing my life again. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but boundaries have a way of reshaping relationships, whether people like it or not. Meanwhile, Emily's world began to crumble. She moved back in with my parents after being evicted from her apartment, expecting the same indulgence I had once provided. But she couldn't manipulate the situation as easily as she used to. The credit card debt she racked up forced my parents to rethink how much they could support her. They realized, begrudgingly, that constantly enabling her wasn't sustainable. Her social life, once a parade of lavish dinners and weekend trips, suffered. Friends who had once joined her for expensive outings stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. Slowly, the facade of confidence she had maintained began to crack. She had relied on my resources and everyone else's tolerance for years, and now, without that crutch, her world was shrinking. One day, a mutual friend called me, almost in disbelief. "Olivia, have you heard?" she said. "Emily's trying to get by without you, and it's not going well. She keeps complaining to mom and dad about everything, food, chores, even her laundry. Apparently, she expects them to wait on her like she was waiting on you." I couldn't help but feel a pang of satisfaction, not cruelty, but relief. Finally, she was facing the reality I had been trying to protect her from for years. She was learning, albeit painfully, that the world doesn't revolve around her and that no one owes her comfort or luxury. With Emily's drama somewhat at bay, I turned my attention to myself. I focused on rebuilding my savings, putting money aside for the home I had dreamed of for so long. I began prioritizing my own needs, health, career, and personal goals that had been on hold while I funded her life. The change was profound. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without carrying someone else's burdens on my shoulders. Even my relationships outside the family improved. Friends noticed a difference in my energy. I wasn't constantly exhausted from juggling 2 jobs just to support someone else. I started saying yes to things I had previously declined, and I even took a short vacation, something I hadn't allowed myself in years. Each small choice to prioritize my own life felt revolutionary. Emily's attempts to manipulate didn't stop entirely. She still sent occasional passive-aggressive messages, and my parents continued to express concern. But I had learned to respond differently. I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I simply reiterated my boundaries. "You need to handle this yourself," I would say. "I'm not responsible for your lifestyle anymore." Over time, Emily began to adapt, slowly, begrudgingly. She got a part-time job, started budgeting her money, and realized that not everyone would bail her out when she overspent. I won't lie, it wasn't pretty. There were tears, arguments, and a lot of resentment. But she was learning, whether she liked it or not. For my part, life improved dramatically. The weight of responsibility I had carried for so long lifted, replaced by a sense of autonomy and purpose. I was no longer living in the shadow of someone else's entitlement. I could plan for my future without fear of someone else draining my resources. I even began investing in personal projects and saving for the house I had dreamed about, a tangible goal that no longer felt impossible. Looking back, I realized that cutting ties financially with Emily was the hardest, most painful decision I've ever made. I had loved her deeply, wanted the best for her, and given everything I had to make her life comfortable. But love isn't sacrifice without limits. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are protection. And in setting them, I finally reclaimed my life. Emily continues to live with my parents, still navigating the consequences of her entitlement. They do what they can to help her, but without me as her personal ATM, she faces reality in ways she never had before. My relationship with her has changed, yes, but it has also become healthier. I am no longer a tool for her comfort, I am a sister with limits, a person with a life of her own, and a future I am building on my own terms. For the first time in years, I feel in control. I've learned that self-respect sometimes requires hard choices, even when it means disappointing those you love. And while it was painful to set these boundaries, it was necessary. Olivia Carter, 28, the sister who had spent years sacrificing everything for another, finally has her life back, and I intend to live it fully. It's been a few years since I, Olivia Carter, finally drew the line and reclaimed my life. The house I once dreamed of is slowly becoming a reality, my career is stable, and I no longer feel like I'm drowning in the responsibilities of someone else's entitlement. I've learned that love and family don't mean sacrificing your entire future for someone else's comfort, and that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. Emily, well, she's still learning. Life hasn't been easy for her, and I won't pretend that I enjoy her struggles. But for the first time, she's facing consequences she couldn't avoid when I was constantly bailing her out. It's hard to watch someone you've loved so deeply stumble, but I also know it's necessary. She needs to grow up, learn responsibility, and understand that the world doesn't revolve around her. As for my parents, the journey with them hasn't been simple. They've had to come to terms with the fact that I am not their personal safety net for Emily. I've learned that it's okay for family relationships to change when unhealthy patterns are broken, and that standing up for yourself doesn't make you a villain, it makes you human. Looking back, I realize that all the sacrifices I made were not wasted, they taught me resilience, patience, and the value of boundaries. But they also taught me a hard lesson: generosity should never come at the expense of your own well-being. Now, I share this story not to shame Emily or my family, but to reflect on the complex dynamics that can exist in families. So many of us have been in situations where love and loyalty are taken for granted, where giving too much becomes a trap, and where standing up for yourself feels impossible. I want to ask you, my readers, my viewers, what would you have done in my place? How far should we go for the people we love, and when is it time to say enough is enough? Have you ever been in a situation where someone took advantage of your generosity, and how did you handle it? Share your thoughts, your experiences, and your advice. I think this story isn't just mine, it's a reflection of the struggles many people face with family, responsibility, and self-respect. At the end of the day, I'm finally free to live my life on my terms. But I want to hear from you. If you were Olivia, would you have done the same? Or would you have found another way to keep supporting your sister? Let's start a conversation. Because family is complicated, life is messy, and sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that save us.
Thank you.